From 1945 to 1948, the Soviets deported to forced labor concentration camps in the Soviet Union from 3 million to 6 million Polish people, of which 585,000 may have died. Enough said. Enough said. Polish number 1 refuses handshakes with Russian GM in World Rapid Championship. In video footage from the recently concluded 2023 World Rapid Championship held in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, Poland's number 1 GM Jan Krzysztof Duda refused to shake hands with Russian GM Denis Hizmatulin before their game in round 1. The game ended in a draw. Hizmatulin has not filed a complaint and wrote in a statement that he does not plan to do so. He also mentioned that he has been restricted from prize events and social activity on this website, which chess.com confirms and explains at the bottom of this article. In the video below, Duda is seated behind the white pieces as Hizmatulin arrives from behind him. The Russian grandmaster traditionally extends his hand before sitting down, and Duda raises his palm to signal a refusal. Hizmatulin then takes a seat. Let's watch it. Here we go. Okay, here he comes to the board. Nope, no handshake, boys. No handshake. No handshake at all. Now, I don't know what happened in this game, but I understand why Duda did that. Of course, Duda does live in Poland, of course, and the Polish people, they have not forgotten what happened during the days of the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR. So I actually applaud Duda there for having the stance, because like Magnus, for example, played against Hizmatulin. He shook his hand. Magnus has also been pretty outspoken about not wanting to play Russians, and yet he shook Hizmatulin's hand during the World Rapid Championship. So I feel like Duda doing this, it is a big sign. It is a big sign. Anyway, the article continues. We have Hizmatulin's work and demonstrations with Karyakin. Denis Hizmatulin, along with 2016 World Championship runner-up GM Sergei Karyakin, has expressed support for the war against Ukraine, but only the latter has been sanctioned by the International Chess Federation. Karyakin's pro-war statements led to a 6-month ban, which effectively barred him from the 2022 FIDE candidates, for which he qualified. Ever since, Karyakin hasn't played in chess tournaments outside of Russia. Hizmatulin visited the front lines with Karyakin and was photographed together with Russian soldiers. They also spoke at a rally in the video linked here, where Hizmatulin concluded with, "Our cause is just, and together we will win." With those activities in mind, Ukrainian GM and former coach of the national team, Alexander Sulpia, pointed out on X/Twitter that Hizmatulin's participation in the tournament violated Olympic laws. Now, this is pretty bad, by the way. Like, I'm going to say, like, everybody can have their opinions, make no mistake about that. But with Karyakin going directly and basically supporting it, that would be like, I don't know, that'd be like if I decided, you know, I'm gonna go to Afghanistan and like take pictures with the troops, or go to Iraq or something like that. Like this is a big step further than simply just like, you know, whatever the country does. Like, this is very active, actively supporting it. And many Ukrainians have died. Many Ukrainians have died during this illegal invasion and, frankly, just outright war that Russia has declared on them. So I think that what Duda did, he's completely right. Do I think the Russian GM is doing something bad? In that case, the USA is also bad. I mean, as I just said, that'd be like if I decide, you know what, I'm gonna go to Iraq, I'm gonna go to Afghanistan. It's not the same thing whatsoever. It's not the same thing at all. So it's quite different. Anyway, let's keep going with the article. Like many other Russian players, Hizmatulin plays under the FIDE flag at tournaments, but his profile still presents Russia as his federation. This has been a workaround that has allowed Russian players to abide by FIDE's ban on Russian and Belarusian flags in tournaments while continuing to represent their country. Okay. While Karyakin was banned for 6 months in 2022, Hizmatulin has faced no consequences for also openly supporting the war in Ukraine. El Pais asked FIDE Chief's legal director, Russian board member Alexander Martyrov, why, and the response was, in quotes, "FIDE does not have a procedure to verify the statements of players. In this area, we follow the decision of our ethics commission, which sanctioned Karyakin in 2022 for violating its code. It seems to us that the judicial procedure is the best mechanism for these matters. If any interested person appeals to that commission and it disqualifies Grandmaster Hizmatulin, that decision will be strictly respected." Now, this feels like a little bit of a cop-out. Because, like, as far as Karyak goes, I don't know the specifics, but I don't believe any player specifically brought a case. Maybe I'm wrong on this, and someone can correct me, but I don't think that a player brought a case against Karyak, and I think the Ethics Commission on their own made this decision. I don't think a player brought a case against him. I'm pretty sure that it was the Ethics Commission on their own took the initiative. Now, I could be wrong on that, obviously, but I don't think a player made this decision. So it's feels a little bit iffy. Nobody complained against her. Well, I thought the commission just saw his tweets and everything else, and they made a decision on their own. Like, it's not like, I don't know, Ding Laurent went to them and said something, or any other player said something. I don't think that happened. So it feels like a little bit of a cop out. But let's keep going. It says there were many other Russian players at the World Rapid and Blitz Championship in Uzbekistan, but most of the top players do not openly praise Russia's war effort. Many have spoken against it, like Russia's #1 GM Yan Nepomniachtchi, who in 2022 signed an open letter to Vladimir Putin to end the war. Scores of others, like former women's world champion Alexander Kostenyuk, have left Russia and now play for other countries. Okay, what's in a handshake? For chess players, the handshake is a big deal, and declining one can have international implications. The handshake is a mutual sign of respect before the game, before and after a game, and its refusal can be interpreted as an insult to an individual, organization, or even a country. The handshake, or lack thereof, is more than a gesture between two people. Executive Director of the Russian Chess Federation, Alexander Kachev, responded to MatchTV.ru, a poorly brought up young man. What more can I say? It's a pity that the best chess player in Poland behaves like this. Wow, that is incredible. That shows the hubris of the Russian Chess Federation. I mean, maybe I'm mistaken, but you know, let me Google something. Let me make sure I don't have my history wrong. Yeah, let me Google something. Yeah. Let me take a look. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. One little bit just to give you guys some history, making sure that I'm not crazy. From 1945 to 1948, the Soviets deported to forced labor concentration camps in the Soviet Union from 3 million to 6 million Polish people, of which 585,000 may have died. Hundreds of thousands, possibly nearly 1 million Poles were killed in Soviet terror and repression. Enough said. That's all. That's the only response that's actually needed to that question. Plain and simple. So it's good that I actually agree with what Duda did, and I think it's a principled stance. So I agree with Duda. But Duda's defiance also received praise on X as a bold and political statement against Russia's invasion that has now lasted nearly 2 years. Some were more strongly worded than others. A relevant and recent case was that between Russian GM Mikhail Kobalia and Ukrainian-born and now Romanian GM Kirill Shevchenko, after Shevchenko refused to shake hands at the 2023 European Individual Chess Championship last March. An outraged Kobalia filed a complaint and launched a social media campaign to draw attention to the perceived affront. Now, this also is very sketchy as well, because I'm pretty confident the reason that Shevchenko did not shake hands with Kobalia is Kobalia has been one of the main coaches for the Russian Federation. He is getting support from people like Filatov and others within the RCF to help the very talented junior player, is it Volodymyr Murzin? Of course, he's just a kid. We don't need to bring him into this. But Kobalia is definitely being supported by the RCF, and that's probably a large part of why Shevchenko would not shake his hand. The FIDE and Disciplinary Commission sanctioned Shevchenko to a warning, but mentioned the following in its conclusion 9.8. The EDC panel cautions that its present decision must not be seen as a precedent for the likely punishment to be imposed in respect of another player who makes himself guilty of the same violation in future, as each instance of a guilty refusal to shake the opponent's hand must be evaluated on the peculiar facts of each case. In other words, the consequence will not be a warning every time. It will be judged on a case-by-case basis. The same report also lists several other handshake incidents, with the highest profile one being in the penultimate toilet gate between GMs Vladimir Kramnik and Veselin Topalov. They both stopped shaking hands later at Chorus Steel 2007. Okay. here we see Kramnik's name popping up randomly out of nowhere once again. An incident in 2008 also belongs on the list. GM Ivan Cheparinov was forfeited in his game after refusing to shake hands with GM Nigel Short. Perhaps the only statement stronger than not shaking hands is to protest the game itself. In recent years, for example, Iranian chess players have forfeited their games rather than play against Israeli opponents. In last year's edition of the same championship, Israeli GM Boris Gelfand accrued 3 free points with his Iranian opponents not making a single move. This year, there were no Israeli players in Uzbekistan. Now, this is a little bit out there, but I will also say something very clearly on this point, which is like the Iranians not playing their games against Boris Gelfand had nothing to do with them making a protest. It had to do with the fact that if they play against an Israeli in a competition, they probably can never go home, because if they go home, they'll probably be thrown in jail, if not worse. So I'm a little bit skeptical of them bringing in this little paragraph about the Iranians and the Israelis, because that's not the reason. The reason the Iranians don't play against the Israelis, because if they did and they go home, they're probably going to have to go before one of the ministries, and they could very easily end up in jail or literally worse. So they shouldn't have added this paragraph, because it's actually has nothing to do with the statement or a protest at all. Statements from players in chess.com. Former world champion and Russian GM Anatoly Karpov speculated Sports Express that Duda did not act of his own volition and was pushed by his sponsors. Duda's manager Adam Dzwanski, on the other hand, told WP.Poland earlier Jan Krzysztof Duda isn't planning to comment on his behavior because his goal wasn't to make a demonstration. He simply did what he believed in his conscience to be right and consistent with his convictions. The fact that it was recorded was a pure coincidence because he was playing on the third board and there were cameras. Yeah, I mean, if that's his conscience, I mean, he's from Poland. Poles do not like the Soviets. They do not like the Russians. So it's kind of weird that there's this weird stuff, as usual, Russians with their conspiracy theories. Okay. On January 4th, Hizmetulin provided a lengthy post for Karyakin's Telegram account. He began with, in the first day of the year, I unexpectedly woke up famous, and explained, as for my opinion on Duda's decision not to shake hands before the start of our game, of course I don't agree with it, but I respect his right to act in that manner, expressing disagreement with my position and with my activity off the chessboard. Now, this is actually the one sane take here from Hizmetulin, where he basically says it's no big deal, he can do whatever he wants. The only person who's not actually like going crazy about the whole thing. If he plays Duda in the future, he wrote that he would extend his hand again, and he asked the media not to hype up and politicize the situation, not to insult the Polish Grandmaster, and definitely not to insult the Polish nation as a whole. He also mentioned an email from chess.com informing him that he was forbidden from tournaments and social activity on the website. The Russian media group RBC inquired about Hizmetulin's closure, and chess.com replied, we can confirm that GM Hizmetulin has been restricted from prize events and social activity on chess.com. This is consistent with our policies and prior actions regarding players who support the war. In fact, the Russian government has banned the entire chess.com platform, apparently due to our stance against the war. The Russian government continues to wage a needless war of aggression that has claimed the lives of countless combatants and civilians, including women and children. Our own Ukrainian staff and loved ones are deeply affected, as are many throughout the world outside. Our opposition to this war has not wavered. We hope for peace and an end to this war that has divided those of us who have long been united by our love of a peaceful and elegant game. So generally speaking, I agree with Duda. I actually think that it's very principled to take the stand. You know what I'd be curious to hear is like Magnus, actually, because Magnus is someone who's played against Hizmetulin. He's played against the Russian players. He shakes their hands despite openly saying things like he feels weird playing against Russians in tournaments. He doesn't feel right. So it's interesting that Magnus would shake hands, but then Duda doesn't. And I'd be curious to see what Magnus has to say about this. Not that we'll ever hear him say something, but it would be interesting.